First, we will make a historical overview of the Greek philosophy, then the scholastic medieval philosophy, then some contemporary trends in Western philosophy. Okay, friends. Firstly, the etymology of philosophy. You know, philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophy, philos and logos, which means love of wisdom. And the unique thing about philosophy here is that the emphasis here is on wisdom, not merely on knowledge. To say water is H2O, this is purely an information. It's only a piece of knowledge for us. Whereas to say water is the Holy Trinity dancing, this is an intuitive wisdom, intuitive experience about nature. Listening to the singing of the bird on the branch of a tree, Buddha said, today's discourse is over. He had conceived the music of the bird as the preaching itself. This is in a way a higher level of knowledge, a level of intuition. Philosophy goes something along that line. It is the love of wisdom. And love is always the total expression of our complete being. So there is a very rich meaning to the etymology of philosophy itself, we could say. Okay, and this is basically the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. We say knowledge can be purely informative, whereas wisdom will always be transformative. According to hermeneutics, understanding is always knowing plus living. Knowing plus living, the knowledge that transforms us. Mere information may not be self-transformatory, but that is not the case with true wisdom. Once we possess the wisdom, we have a radical transformation in person and life. Have you learned that by learning which you learn about everything? Have you possessed that by possessing which you possess everything? This is how the Indian wisdom goes in Bhagavad Gita or in the introduction to Tattvamasi in the Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka Upanishads. This is how the question goes. So this is the transformative knowledge, we could say. That's why Raymond Panikkar, the late renowned philosopher and theologian, he would say, all the fundamental problems of the world are because we have failed to raise the fundamental questions. If only we raise the fundamental questions, shall we have solution to the problems of the world? That is what Panikkar is saying here. Okay. Then, on this point also, you know, philosophy, we say, is the starting point of philosophy is wonder. That is to say, of course, there are several various starting points for various branches of knowledge. But as for philosophy, we say the starting point is wonder. It was Platonic idea to conceive wonder as the starting point of philosophy. Why do we mean by saying that wonder is the starting point of philosophy? It means we get amazing perception of the mysteries of nature. Okay, the mysteries of nature evokes a sense of wonder within us. Looking at a board, we may be wondering a child's bewilderment. That is the starting point of philosophy. We all are philosophers. Resting in the arms of our blessed mothers, we will have asked, looking at the moon, what is that? It is the sense of curiosity we call wonder. Einstein was given a compass by his grandfather when he was just 2.5 years old. Later on in his autobiography, he recollects this event and says that that compass gave me the awareness that there is something hidden behind the things. There is an opaque depth of mystery lurking behind the ordinary objects we daily tread on but notice not. This perception of the sense of mystery in the ordinary phenomena we call the wonder. And that is the starting point of philosophy. In the Indian tradition, the Vedas speak about 3 instances which is said to have provoked their philosophical curiosity. But this is only a metaphorical way of saying what in general it says, no. All the rivers in the world, they flow into the ocean, but the ocean never overflows. Why is that? A black cow produces white milk. How is it possible? Indian subcontinent was very famous for the frequent seasonal changes. Why are there so many natural differences within a short span of time? And these questions, the sages wondered it. Hence the profound intuitive wisdom of India. Okay, there are several examples that we have got to explain to highlight this point, but that is not our concern here. We will move on to the next point. So we say the definition of philosophy. The course itself is titled Philosophy and Theology. From the very definition of the philosophy, this distinction is very clear. What philosophy is said to be a search for ultimate reality. Ultimate, that is the significant part of this definition. All disciplines, all branches of knowledge are in search for reality, but they search for precise, specific questions which are the subject matter of their specific discipline. Okay, and mostly they have experimental methods, whereas for philosophy, the method is reasoning or speculation. Rationalization is this method of philosophy. We think logically and find out the answers. So we say philosophy is the search for the ultimate reality by reasoning. It is the science which by the natural light of reason explores the causes and or what happened here? Why did it go big? Okay, 1 minute. Which is reason studies the first causes or highest principles of all things. In other words, the science of things in their first causes, insofar as they belong to the natural order. Philosophy is the science of things in their first causes. First cause, the first cause, the ultimate cause. That is the definition of philosophy, we said. What is the ultimate origin of everything? Okay, that is the ultimate question. Who is my father? If I say my father's name, you will be happy to know who is my father, and that answers your question. But in philosophy, it does not answer what is my ultimate origin. Philosophy is raising that question. And philosophy raises this question only about those things belonging to the natural order. And this is the crucial distinction between philosophy and theology. Theology, is based on revelation. It begins with the revealed set of truths. Revelation, Bible, sacred scriptures, they are said to be compiled wisdom revealed by God through sacred authors. So philosophy deals with things of the natural order. Knowledge and reality of the supernatural order, theology deals with, not with the natural order. Whereas philosophy, by means of reasoning, deals with beings of the natural order, natural and supernatural, as regards the subject matter of the disciplines. That is the basic distinction between philosophy and theology. So we say the material object of philosophy is being. Material object, by definition, material object means the general subject matter. The general subject matter of a discipline. So what is the general object which philosophy is doing? It studies about everything. Anything that is existing in its own way, that is what we call a being. Therefore, philosophy, the material object is being. And for formal object of philosophy, that is the unique question or the methodology of philosophy, that is the ultimate question. Philosophy asks the ultimate question about everything. That is the formal or the specific angle or perspective which a discipline is studying a topic, its subject matter, its material object is called the formal object. In that regard, philosophy's specific perspective is the perspective of the ultimate question. Okay, you may just keep these points in mind. Scope of philosophy. It is to develop one's own philosophy, freeing ourselves from cultural embeddedness or cultural enslavement. And this is the response of the people to the cultural and existential realities of their time. Say, for example, existentialism, contemporary Western philosophy. This was a reaction to the abstract philosophy of the West, the problems of the existent flesh and blood human beings, life, death, sickness. These were the subject matters of philosophy. Exploring the poverty and nakedness of the ordinary folk of the Indian population, Gandhism was born. And Marxism was a revolt against the suffering oppressed proletariat. Liberation theology, this was the Christian response to the oppression in the Latin American countries. So philosophy is always a response to the existential realities of the time. Cultural and philosophical embeddedness of philosophy, we need to keep that in mind. Okay, this point I already said, knowledge just knowing plus living. I will skip this point. Some literary examples I wanted to highlight, but that is not important here. And these are the branches of philosophy. Epistemology, philosophy of knowledge. How do we get a true knowledge? What is truth? How do we get a true knowledge? What is the origin and destiny of the universe? We call it the philosophy of cosmos. Philosophy of God. Does God exist? What are the proofs for God's existence? What are the arguments against the non-existence of God? And how do we counter-argue against that? These are the problem of evil and the existence of God. These are the subject matters of theology. Philosophy of man, anthropology. Where does human come from? Do we have a soul? Do we have an ultimate destiny? Are we mere material stuff? Moral philosophy, what is right and wrong? What is the ultimate norm or standard for ethics? How do we distinguish between good and evil? These are the subject matters of moral philosophy. Philosophy of being or ontology or metaphysics. What is being? Everything that is existing in its own way is called being, we say. What is the nature of being? What are the attributes of being? What all things can we say about being? All these things. The nature of philosophy, philosophy of mind, philosophy of people, philosophy of beauty or aesthetics, philosophy of science. There are several branches, recent branches of philosophy also. Okay, this point I have already said. And there are several disciplines, I think at the end we are coming across it. History of philosophy can be classified mainly into 4 segments, namely the pre-Socratic philosophers, Greek philosophy one, that itself can be classified into pre-Socratic philosophy and Socratic philosophers. Then medieval philosophy, including Saint Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Anselm, and so on. Then modern philosophy, beginning with Descartes, Leibniz, Kant, and so on. And then comes the contemporary Western philosophy, the existentialist school, Jean-Paul Sartre, Karl Jaspers, Gabriel Marcel, all of the many others, Soren Kierkegaard. In this course, our concern is with philosophy and theology. Therefore, mostly our focus will be on the Greek philosophy and its development in Christian theology. Christian theology was developed under the influence of the Greek Hellenistic philosophy or the Greek Western philosophy. Hence, we go back, we begin our discussion with the pre-Socratic philosophers. Then we discuss the Socratic philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Then we move on to the medieval philosophers like Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas. Okay, pre-Socratic philosophers who have really laid the foundations of philosophy. The original thinkers who raised the ultimate questions about the existence of nature and human. Prominent among them, among the pre-Socratic philosophers is Thales. He's also, some pronounce it as Thales, lived sometime around 545 BC. And according to him, the ultimate reality is water. Why did he say so? No, because water is everywhere, in the clouds, in the sky, underwater, in the sea, in the atmosphere, everywhere. On the land, we see water everywhere. Water is a kind of omnipresent reality. So, something that is all-pervasive, universal, that must be the ultimate reality. This is a philosophical quest. The universalization of reality. That is the significance of saying that water is the ultimate reality. And there is an element of reductionism present here. Reducing everything to one thing alone. That is what we call reductionism. Here it is a kind of material reductionism because they could not think of anything beyond water. No, that is why. So what the significance of Thales' philosophy is that he is the first one to postulate the laws of nature as foundational to nature. Nature is operating according to definitive laws and rules. Until then, the idea was that the certain puppet gods are playing with nature. That is why there are havocs, calamities, earthquakes, storms. No, these all are resultant of specific laws of nature. So, Thales effected the shift from a God-governed universe to a Lord-governed universe. God not in the ultimate sense, but as semi-gods, deities, superficial nature gods. That is what is meant here. Okay. He was a great mathematician and philosopher, predicted solar eclipse and many other things we can say about. Next guy, Anaximander. And his emphasis is about multiplicity. While Thales tended to reduce everything to water, Anaximander was for multiplicity and plurality. No air, water, fire, earth, infinite and boundless substance. Boundless substance, that is for him, ultimate boundless substance, the apeiron of universe. All these realities are part of a boundless substance. Here also the philosophical significance is that the ultimate reality is considered to be boundless. Beyond all this air, water, fire, and earth, there is something substantially foundational, which they called as substance itself. It is upon which later on Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, and so on build up their philosophy. A kind of substance which can be said to be boundless. We do not know what that substance is. Later on, medieval philosophers will transform that substance into the idea of God. The medieval idea of God is very much prefigured in the pre-Socratic philosophy itself. An ultimate boundless reality, unlimited. Okay. Again, Anaximanes, M-A-N-E-S, I'm sorry for the typo. According to him, air is the arche of universe, and he also bestowed divine attributes to air. Doctrine of change. Fire, when it is condensed, it becomes wind, then cloud. When still more condensed, it becomes water, then earth, then stones. This is how his understanding of the origin and evolution of the universe would go. Okay, this all comes from the fire according to him, basically. Heraclitus, he noticed a change everywhere in the universe. Nobody can jump into the same river twice. This is the famous dictum by Heraclitus. What he says now, there is nothing permanent, only change. What is the meaning of saying that you cannot jump into the same river twice? The point is that by the time you try to jump for the second time, you are not jumping into the same river because the water has flown ahead. You are not jumping in the same location, in the same water. Also, that is only 50% of the story. What is the remaining half? You have also undergone change. The person who jumps into the same river second time is not the same person. I also have undergone change. Every fraction of second I undergo changes, no? That is why Heraclitus said change is everything. And quite the contrary was the position of Parmenides. He said, he denies the reality of change. He changed that everything is permanent. Permanence is the value according to Parmenides. The significance, philosophical significance of Parmenides' idea is the quest for stability, consolidation. Something stable is considered to be valuable, and Parmenides emphasized that idea. So here is the basic distinction between Heraclitus and Parmenides. I will share these slides with the father, and you can get it from them later on from father. Then Anaxagoras, everything in everything, the interconnectedness of reality. Therefore, what is that is connecting the entire universe? See, some of the most recent developments in neuro-religion, neuroscience, and neuropsychology, even in 6th century, 4th century BC, these people had understood. That is wonderful. Okay. Nous or mind is fundamental to the universe. Even matter is carved out of mind. The mind is primary. Even matter evolved out of mind or consciousness, according to some philosophers. Even some scientists are holding this view. Okay, later on in the advanced course in Science Religion Dialogue, we can speak more in detail about this idea. Anyway, this is a very profound idea that here emphasizes the role of primacy of mind over matter. Nous is the first principle of motion. There is an ultimate mind. And this is something close to the idea of God. Ultimately, God is pure spirit, pure mindfulness, or pure consciousness. Okay. Democritus. Ancient atomic theory. The quest for the basic building blocks of nature. Everything is made up of ultimate atom, indivisible units of matter, which can be called as atoms. This is a kind of materialist idea. Then comes Pythagoras. Pythagorean theorem is very famous. What is unique about Pythagoras is the emphasis on mathematics. And that is theologically also very relevant. Nature is written in the law as per the laws of mathematics. Behold, I come to conquer thee with the power of mathematics. Francis Bacon said in the Middle Ages, in modern times. Okay, nature and science, the key to the success of science is purely mathematics, we know. What is ChatGPT? The triumphant celebration of the powers of mathematical algorithm. This is the power of mathematics, we could say. Human body is written in pure mathematical codes. Fuzzy logic, that is what is used in a sunflower. The way the branches of a coconut tree are organized. Wonderful fuzzy logic is applied therein. What the supercomputers are following. Human body follows the golden ratio. I don't have time to explain all these things. Maybe on another occasion, circumstances permit, we can do that. And Ernst Gödel, a contemporary philosopher and mathematician and logician, German, he came up with this idea of an ontological mathematical argument for God's existence, an irrefutable argument from mathematics he wished to propose for God's existence. Gödel. So all these ideas are in their miniature form, long anticipated in the thoughts of Pythagoras analogically, we could say. Nearly 1/3 of our time is over with the pre-Socratic philosophers, so I will conclude these authors here. And I will now let us move on to the Greek philosophers. In the meantime, if you have any questions regarding the pre-Socratic philosophers, please let me know. Introduction to the history of philosophy. With this introduction to the history of pre-Socratic philosophers, I will switch my discussion to the Greek philosophers. Sorry, the Socratic philosophers. I hope my slides are shared and you can view them, I hope. With this assumption, I will proceed. I will make it a full screen now. Okay, these are the founding fathers of Western philosophy, we could say. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates was the master of Plato, and Plato was the master of Aristotle. Therefore, there is a kind of succession as well as deviation and development of thought among these philosophies. In nutshell, I will say the gist of their philosophy. Socrates, around 469 BC, and his father was a sculptor, mother a midwife, and he was of respectable descent. And what is famous about Socrates is his trial and execution. he criticized the regime in Athens, and they were very displeased with Socrates and alleged that he is misleading the youth with his radical thinking, extremist ideas, and so on. Although democracy was restored in Socrates' Athens, Socrates was uncomfortable with the idea of democracy, whereby the minority can be easily suppressed with the voice of power of the majority. So he did not consider democracy to be an ideal mode of governance. He stood for ideal monarchy, enlightened philosophical reigning, like Plato's philosopher king. Plato said kings should be philosophers and philosophers should be kings. Plato's philosopher king idea. That was because to avoid any kind of partisanship or arbitrariness in our decision making, Plato and Socrates advocated the idea of philosopher king. And this was displeasing to the rulers of that time. And they wanted to finish off Socrates. Although he could escape this punishment, he said this is unbecoming to a philosopher to flee from these kinds of trials. So he was a moral preacher of that time. So he boldly faced deaths, stretching out his hands to receive the hemlock poison, basically. Okay. So this is about his trial and execution. This point I already explained. And what is unique about Socrates now, his big contribution to philosophy is the Socratic method itself. What is the Socratic method? This we call the method of questioning or dialectic. Socratic dialogue or dialectic. What is that? We start questioning everything, asking questions, finding answers, then questioning our own answers, then forming new premises, then again questioning and counter questioning the new solutions and premises that we have come up with. So he will pose always questions and questions after questions to his students. He will always challenge their findings and will take them to higher and higher levels of knowledge. So this is how philosophy moves from the mundane or the peripheral to the ultimate or the fundamental. This is a Socratic method. And this is extensively used in the judicial system, in the courts we know. Okay, in debates, this is extensively used, the Socratic method. Problem solving through questioning and questioning. Okay. This is what contemporary science is doing. Karl Popper's idea of falsification. We try to prove a hypothesis, then we find that this hypothesis is false and this is thrown out. But hypothesis second is accepted as true and it becomes hypothesis 2 if it refuses to be refuted. So we have a better and greater content of truth therein. Okay, this is the unique contribution of Socrates to philosophy. And philosophers are always questioning people. And that is the nature of the fundamental nature of philosophy too. Socrates believed fervently in the immortality of soul, and he was convinced that the gods had singled him out as a kind of divine emissary to persuade the people of Athens that their mortal values were wrong-headed and that instead of being so concerned with their families, careers, and political responsibilities, they ought to be worried about the welfare of their souls. This is like Jesus is saying in the gospel, what does it profit a man even if he wins over the entire world? What matters fundamentally is the soul, immortality of the soul. See, the quest for perennial values has been emphasized, or the need for going beyond the earthly things to the celestial and heavenly domains of reality. That has been a perennial quest of philosophy. And our soul, the entity within us called soul, being eternal and immortal. This idea was emphasized by the Greek philosophers, especially by Socrates, beginning with Socrates himself. Okay. Another significant contribution of Socrates is the concept of virtue. You know, Socrates' philosophy is called virtue ethics. Nowadays, also this virtue ethics is becoming one of the mainstream disciplines in moral philosophy and bioethics. What does virtue ethics mean? No, people should search for virtue in life. They should not be confining themselves to sensual ways. Materialistic value system they should give up. They should distinguish between good and evil. And they should always have a distinct preference for good over bad, the best over the better. And how do we distinguish between good and bad? By rational thinking. We have our intuitive capacity for that. Rationalization, reasoning will help us to distinguish between. So, one of the important dictums of Socrates was know thyself. A life that is unquestioned is not worth living. Yes, unexamined life is not worth living according to Socrates. We must always be questioning ourselves, examining ourselves, and correcting the trajectories of our own lives according to Socrates. So that is part of the virtue. And Socrates' political philosophy, I already said, they were for political, therefore. And he also emphasized the idea of an inner voice. I already said that Socrates emphasized the role of reasoning in distinguishing between good and evil. There is a voice within us which he called as divine madness, which is responsible for all poetry, mysticism, and love. Even philosophy is generated from the voice within us, the moral conscience that we have. So Socrates spoke extensively about these things. Okay, so much about Socrates. His life itself was a kind of philosophical way of being. And the greatest influence he exerted on Plato, that is to be studied further. So let us move on to the next philosopher, Plato. And he is one of the most prominent Greek philosophers, was a renowned mathematician, and he is perhaps the most known and widely discussed Greek philosophers. And he opposed the materialism of Democritus and Epicurus. So Democritus wanted to reduce everything to atoms. So reality is merely physical, according to Democritus. Epicurus advocated a kind of hedonist way of life, pleasure-seeking, eating, drinking, and making merry. So he opposed both these ideologies, and proposed his own philosophy beyond materialism, and laid the foundations of the entire Western philosophy. And he is the founder of the famous Academy in Athens. And this school continued until AD 529, you know. And Platonic philosophy, from Platonic philosophy, later on originated Platonism and Neoplatonism, post-Platonic thinking. So Plato has been dominant until the late Middle Ages, we could say. And even 20th century, Renaissance has rediscovered Plato, we could say. Many of his ideas are still seriously discussed in philosophical circles. And his famous works are dialogues, and there are several subsections or subsets or books to dialogues: Republic, Timaeus, and Symposium, the famous works of Plato. So we will discuss the main philosophical concepts in Plato. Firstly, Platonic philosophy can be said to be a kind of idealism. Why do we say Platonic metaphysics is a kind of idealism? Because he considered ideas to be the ultimate reality. What is idea? See, we have the idea of the good. We have the idea of the beauty. We have the idea of virtue. Where do these ideas come from? Because there is an eternal world where all these ideas are existing. Plato called this world the world of forms. This is a metaphysical world, beyond this physical world. Okay, beyond this physicalist material world, there is a metaphysical transcendental world, which may be termed as the world of ideas or world of forms. And all the visible objects, this world that we see about around us is merely a copy of that real world. This world is not the real world. This is only a photocopy of the real world. Plato was very much antagonistic about the poets, though he himself was a poet. Poets are romanticizing about the world, considering the world to be real. In fact, the world is not real. It is only a kind of illusion or maya. This is only a photocopy. Poetry is then only a photocopy of the photocopy. World of ideas alone is real. There is a metaphysical world, something eternal, absolute, unchanging things are there. Reality's ultimate reality is the world of idea for Plato. So that is an objective real world. Therefore, this idea is also called realism. And this is a kind of dualism. Dualism, considering reality, distinguishing between realities of the world and God. In Plato, there is a distinction between the world of ideas and the world of the material objects. This is a dualist world, therefore. Okay. And the particular world of the particularities or particular objects around us has not much meaning. What is important is the universal concepts, which is in the world of forms. Particulars are material copies of the forms. In that regard, Plato may be said to be the first essentialist. Essentialist is one who thinks essences or attributes that make an object or substance what it fundamentally is. All things have essence. Okay, our attributes, what make us what we are. There is an essence to us. Later on, Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas would call it the substance within us, which is the soul within us. Anyway, here there is already this idea in its miniature form prefiguring in Plato's philosophy. There is an essence to all objects. In that regard, he can be said to be an essentialist also. And according to him, this theory of knowledge or epistemology, true knowledge or intelligence is the ability to grasp the world of forms with one's mind, even though his evidence for the existence of form is intuitive only. What is true knowledge? True knowledge is the knowledge about the world of forms or the ideal world or the real world, the metaphysical world. Okay, and his allegory of the cave is very famous in epistemology. What is that now? We human beings, this image will tell you about that allegory of the cave. We human beings, ordinary human beings are people enslaved and chained in the darkness of a cave with a little light, very little light coming from behind the wall in the cave. Very little light. And we see the shadow of the objects behind us through this light. This light is producing, this light behind us is producing the shadows of the objects behind us. So the persons who are enslaved and enchained in the cave can see some shadows moving and reflected on the wall in front of them. And the persons in the cave think that these shadows are the real reality. Their world and perception is so limited, they cannot know the truth, therefore. They mistake the shadows for the reality. And now suppose some people were set free and they were sent out. They are free out of the cave now. They see the sunlight. They see the sun and everything in its fullness. They are scared. They cannot believe what they are seeing. they rush back to the cave and they are comfortable with the darkness and bondage and shadows of the cave. This is the plight of most people when they are confronted with the truth. They are afraid to face it. They are scared of truth. Then some people go out, see it, they rush back to the cave because they are reluctant to face the truth. And those who are really facing the truth, they are the enlightened ones. They are the people who have really experienced and seen how or have come to know the world of forms, the ideas, the real world. Okay, so this the Plato's analogy of the cave is very famous in that regard in philosophy and okay, Timaeus, Plato took the four elements, fire, air, water, and earth, all these ideas. And unlike the creation by God of the Plato can demiurge, Plato's idea of creation. Plato thinks that there must have been a pre-existing matter out of which God created all this world. So Plato believes in one God from whom both the good and evil have originated. Both the good and evil have originated from the same God. So this is a kind of moral universalism or absolutism, as opposed to the moral relativism of the sophists of Plato's time. Teleological worldview. This is very, very important. Teleology, telephone, speaking to the end, related to the end. So purpose is the point here. Plato emphasized teleology or purposiveness in the world. The universe about us has a purpose. It has a meaning and goal. And later on, many philosophers, scientists, and so on are inclined to reject any kind of teleology to the universe, especially atheists and materialists. They find no meaning to life or purpose to human existence or goal. From dust to dust, from ashes to ashes, from tomb to tomb. That is the tragic plight of the humans, according to existential philosophers. But that was not the original perception of the perennial philosophers like Plato. They emphasized the teleological worldview. Therefore, we must be leading since life has meaning and purpose, we must be virtual and ethical in our life. Virtue is an excellence of the soul, and soul has the properties of reason, passion, and spirit. Justice is the most important value. Virtue was the sort of knowledge of good and evil. This is necessary for reaching the ultimate good or eudaimonia in Greek. And we can say in that regard, Plato also is therefore an exponent of the virtue ethics, we could say. Then another unique point about Plato is his concept of love. According to Plato, love should begin with the sensual, karmic love, the bodily, physical love. Love may begin with that, but that is not the true love. This must evolve from the physical form to the mental, psychological form, and finally evolve into the supreme love. This is a kind of agapic love, ideal love. Love should evolve into a kind of ideal love, platonic love. Okay, love should not be getting stuck up with the physical, biological love. That is only the starting point for Plato. And in fact, we must say contemporary neuroscience is rediscovering this idea. Romantic love is only one phase of the production of the neurotransmitters in the brain. That should eventually move on to consolidation or stabilization or commitment. That is how our human brain is programmed. And this idea is very well anticipated in Plato, we could say. So we have got to have higher pursuits in life. And this is the legacy of Plato, that it is very lasting, tremendous impact on Saint Augustine, rise of Aristotle from Platonic philosophy. Scholastic philosophy did not have much access to Plato's philosophy. Neoplatonism is the offshoot of Platonic philosophy. And during the Renaissance period in modern times, Platonic philosophy is very much restored. Okay. Now let us move on to Aristotle. Aristotle is yet another prominent figure of the Western philosophy, one of the founding fathers of the Western philosophy, we could say. And his can be said to be the first, most comprehensive system of philosophy with its own ethics, philosophy of aesthetics, philosophy of politics, metaphysics, logic, science, and two. That is where there is altogether several isms attributed to Aristotle, like Aristotelianism, Averroism, Avicennism, scholasticism. Avicennism is from the Islamic philosophy, stemming from the Greek Aristotelian philosophy. Okay. Again, I will skip this biographical information about him. Okay, but let us move, for want of time, let us move on to his philosophy. And he was a student of Plato, and after Plato's death, he lived in Plato's academy for another 20 years more. Later, he was invited to teach Alexander in Macedonia, and later he returned to Athens when people turned aggressive to Aristotle. He ran away from Athens, saying that I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy. What is the first sin against philosophy? That they assassinated Socrates. He did not want to follow the suit of Socrates. That is what he said. Okay. And Aristotle is one of the best logicians that the world has produced. Immanuel Kant in the 18th century said, everything that can be said in logic has already been said by Aristotle. And his idea of major premise, minor premise, and conclusion coming up. All men are rational. Thomas is rational. Thomas is a man, therefore Thomas is rational. A logical way of arguing. Also the principle of identity. A can only be A and not B at the same time. 2 plus 2 is 4. Not 2 plus 2 is 5. Principle of identity, principle of non-contradiction. All these are fundamental principles of logic in Aristotle. The use of axioms. Okay. Basically, axiomatic philosophy, Aristotelian. That means unopposed, unquestionable principles in philosophy. Principles of truth are there according to axiomatic idea of truth. That is there in Aristotle. Also, substance, then let's switch over to Aristotle's metaphysics. Substance and accidents. Let me take you back to Platonic philosophy. Aristotle differs significantly deviates from Plato, but at the same time, he carries on the thinking pattern of Plato in a different manner. Plato said that there is an ultimate world of forms or ideas. And there is an essential nature common to all beings. Plato said, that is the world of the ideas or the real, the universal abstracts. Aristotle called it the substance. All beings have their own essence and substance. See, I am a human being. What is my substance? My unique identity as a human being, as Augustine. That is my substantial form, coming from my substance or essence. Then what is my weight? What is my size? What is my shape? What is my color? All these things are my accidents only. The first dualism in Aristotle, substance and accidents. All beings are made up of substance and accidents. And that substance can be identified with the form and accidents with the matter. What is form? Substantial form. As for me, human being, you are a human being, I am also a human being. What is common between us? It is our form. You are Thomas and I am Augustine. We are different, but there is difference and unity between us. What is the unity? Our substantial form. What is the difference? Two entities, our accidental properties. That is a matter of prime matter. Therefore, substantial form and prime matter. Again, potentiality and actuality, another related concept. What is that? All beings have the reality to become something. They are all in a process of becoming or evolving or changing. This becoming board is called our potentiality. I can be growing in knowledge. I can be growing in size. I can be growing in wisdom. That is my potentiality. My actuality is the state that I have evolved to be, that I have become potentially. In this, actuality is an attribute of substance or form. And potentiality, matter is undergoing change. Therefore, potentiality of matter. Essence and existence. And essence, anything that is existing in its own way is an existent. Every being, our daily doing, thinking, praying, all these things come under the category of existence. Whereas under essence, what is unique and distinguishing mark of the humans? The substantial form. So this is how Aristotle would develop his dualistic epistemology and dualistic metaphysics based on prime matter and substantial form. And this is what later on Thomas Aquinas would use for developing and defending his apologetic Christian theology. Okay, to anticipate the idea of Thomistic idea. Every being has got essence and existence or form and matter, according to Aristotle. I am a human being. I have the substantial form of humanness, which is common to all humans. And I have the prime matter, which is unique to my body. Matter and form I have. This is true about every material, every object, every being. And this is upon this doctrine, Thomas Aquinas developed his concept of transubstantiation, the transformation of body and bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. The bread and wine are considered to be the material substance, matter, and the words of consecration uttered by the priest is said to be the substantial form. When form merges with the matter, a new species is evolving. That is transubstantiation. This is how Thomas Aquinas developed the apologetic Eucharistic theology upon Aristotelian metaphysics. The same idea, the dual nature of Christ. Christ as both human and divine. The two natures in Christ. Thomistic Christology is very much founded on Aristotelian metaphysics. Aristotelian hylomorphism, if you are not familiar with this concept, HYLOMORPHISM, hylomorphism. Aristotle, something made up of both matter and form. That is doctrine of hylomorphism. Okay. So Pope John Paul II himself acknowledged this fact that Christian theology is very much founded upon the Aristotelian metaphysics. And later on, while speaking to the Catholic scientific theologians, he was saying that just as the Aristotelian philosophy laid the foundations of Christian theology in the Middle Ages today, natural sciences should form the foundations of Christian theology. Then the four causes of Aristotle are very famous. The material cause, the formal cause, efficient cause, final cause. Let us take the example of table. Material cause. The stuff out of which the table is made, that is its material cause. Therefore, wood is the material cause. Formal cause. The formal cause focuses on the unique structure, pattern, or essence or shape that defines an object. It is the shape of the table, the form of the table, tableness, the four legs, okay, and the flat surface. That is the formal cause, or the form of the table is the formal cause of an object. Efficient cause, something that is turning the material cause into the formal cause. Here the carpenter, okay, who turns the wood into table. That is the efficient cause, or the agent of the agent. Then the final cause, the purpose for which it is made, the purpose of table, the utility of the table. And this can be said in general about the universe altogether. Where did the universe come from? What is the form of this universe? What is the matter of this universe? Who framed this universe? What is the purpose of this universe? And it is upon these foundational four causes that later on Thomas Aquinas would develop his 5 ways for proving God's existence. That we will soon discuss. 5 ways of proving God. Aristotle in ethics is called Nicomachean ethics. Basically, this is virtue ethics aiming towards happiness as the end of life, distinguishment in good and evil, avoiding extremes. Virtue lies in the middle. You should not be simply hedonistic, should not be sensual and always pleasure-seeking. And at the same time, you should not be extremely ascetic. Virtue lies in the middle, Aristotle would always say. Aristotle on God. God as the unmoved mover, the first cause of everything. God is a thought of thought, ultimate pure mind. Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle's ideas on soul. Soul is immortal. All humans have got soul, and there are different types of soul. And soul is basically the rational faculty of our mind. That we have the thinking capacity is the proof that we have a soul. Our rationality is very much seated in our soul. Okay. And this is the painting by Raphael, the School of Athens of Plato and Aristotle. The same thing, very famous painting, distinction between Plato and Aristotle. Okay, do you have any quick questions on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle? I think I will wind up Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle here. And where is that? I will move on to the medieval philosophers, Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. We have only less than 30 minutes left. So we will have a quick overview of Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. So as I said, our course is all about philosophy and theology. What is important for Christian theology, we are dealing with here. And for the apologetic Christian theology, medieval Greek philosophy is very important. I hope you have my screen shared with you. Okay, so Christian theology is very much founded upon Greek Western philosophy. It has its positive merits as well as demerits. Since it was developed in an apologetic context, it is rationally very strong Christian theology, extremely rich. We could withstand any speculative rational assault on Christian faith because this has been rationally defended by some of the best brains in the history of philosophy, like Augustine, Aquinas, and so on. Bede Griffiths has commented about Aquinas' Summa Theologica as the hair-splitting intellectual gymnastics of the human brain. Say, this is a book. I make a direct judgment that this is a book. Simply from that judgment, Thomas Aquinas and companions will go on to make further and further speculations and prove that ultimately there is God and that God is simple that God is beautiful, God is all omnipotent, all benevolent, God can be a trinity. All these ideas are so systematically argued out. That is the rationalist brilliance of the Christian theology. The problem with this kind of thinking is that since as a result of the emphasis on the rational part, the experiential, intuitive, the internal dimension of our religiosity and experience got compromised. So the tradition of John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila, the mystical traditions did not develop adequately. Thomas Aquinas, although Thomas Aquinas himself was a great mystic. Okay. Thomas Aquinas, about his own Summa Theologica, he said, all what I have written is mere rubbish. This is all worth a straw. Despite all the profundity of Summa Theologica, he said at the moment of mystical experience. Well, how is that? I don't get the Latin for only God alone exists. That was only God alone. Everything for you, O God. That was what Thomas Aquinas' statement at the moment of mystical experience. Okay. That's why Heidegger has criticized the Christian theology. He says, as a result of the entanglement of Christian theology with the Western metaphysics, there emerged a dogmatic conception of God, whereby God is blanketed under the layers of metaphysical categories. That is so Western metaphysics speaks about God, no? God as the unmoved mover, first cause, being, symbol, beautiful, and so on. Okay, these are metaphysical categories. This is the strength and weakness of the interaction between Greek, Western, Greek metaphysics and Christian theology. Firstly, Saint Augustine. And Saint Augustine's life, I know you all are familiar with. I did not explain that. He led a sinful life initially and then had a wonderful conversion. And he integrated both Plato and Neoplatonism with the Christian orthodoxy. And what led to Augustine's conversion itself was the Neoplatonic idea of the world of ideas, or the real world, or the world of truth and light, which is beyond this world. And he saw Christ as that world of idea, the real world, the revealed truth of the Father. Christ is the world of idea. And that is what led to his conversion, basically. And he was influenced by many other philosophers also at his conversion to Christian life, and ordained as a priest in 391. Later, he was consecrated as the bishop of Hip-Hop. And his famous works are the Confessions and the City of God. And the City of God is very famous, since Rome was destroyed in 410 AD. People were blaming Christianity for the destruction of Rome. Since they abandoned the gods of Rome, they cursed Rome and cursed Christianity and their God for the destruction of Rome. And Augustine is writing City of God in that context to show that history itself is the tension between the powers of the world and the power of God. And God is leading us to his city, that is the city of God, that is this worldly church itself. Therefore, the destruction of the material world is in a way positive sign that God has greater city prepared for us in church. That is the idea of the city of God. Church as the heavenly city ruled by love is the ultimate and final norm here. And Augustine said, ultimately, we can have knowledge through reasoning. Genuine knowledge can be obtained through reasoning. We should have thorough reasoning in our religion and spirituality also. Augustine and Aquinas were very keen to emphasize the role of reasoning in knowledge, Faith, hope, and charity, theological virtues, Thomas Aquinas said. But Thomas Aquinas added another virtue to that, reason. Aquinas says both faith, hope, and charity must be ruled and governed by reasoning itself. If our faith is not founded on reason, this can turn out to be superstition, fundamentalism, or anarchy. Religious idolatry. This is what we see all over the world today. Okay, the right-wing, left-wing religious fundamentalism in several parts of the world, because we are not governed by reason. That Thomas Aquinas and Augustine were very careful to emphasize the role of reason even in the practice of the theological virtues. Reason is a unique and subjective view of time and existence. What is time? Augustine has spent several pages of his biography, The Confessions, for reflections over time and memory and history and so on. And finally, Augustine ends up in a subjective one. Time is only a mental construction. Our mind is producing time, Augustine's idea. And theology, balancing of free will and predestination. Did God know that we will be going to heaven or hell? Did God know that we will end up in hell? Then why did he create us? If God knew that we will go to hell, or are we predestined to end up in hell? Or are some people predestined to end up in heaven? Then who is responsible? What role is there for our freedom? So the human freedom as well as predestination was a big problem of Augustine's time. And Augustine said, we are created as free beings, God being so benevolent and love. He is so extremely benevolent and good that his infinite love allows us to be created as free beings who can misuse their freedom at all. We have the capacity to misuse freedom also. God has given us as much freedom because he is so much good. There is no predestination, rather it is the misuse of human freedom, God-given freedom, that is leading someone to heaven or hell, or the right to use to heaven and misuse to hell. This is very much in continuation with the virtue ethics in Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, we can see. And this thinking has, and his idea of original sin. We humans have an innate, inborn, collective inclination to evil. Our human birth itself is in a kind of, we all are partaking in the sinfulness of the first parents. Even if Adam and Eve are not historical, even if they are only mythical figures, we have an inherent vulnerability towards evil and sin. This is where Christ's Paschal mystery saves us all human beings. That is the idea. And he also advocated a metaphorical or allegorical interpretation of Bible, not a literal interpretation of Bible. Bible should not be understood literally, but only allegorically, Saint Augustine said. And theological concept, balancing free, at these points we said, no? His creation out of nothing. Time began only with the Big Bang. There was no time before Big Bang. Therefore, don't ask the question, what was your God doing before he created the world? Atheists were asking question, you say that your God created the world. Then was your God sleeping? What was he doing before he created the world? Augustine sarcastically said, before creating the world, God was creating hell for people asking this kind of stupid questions. Because Augustine said there was no before the creation. Time began only with creation. There was no time before creation. And this is his legacy and influence, and you can very well see what is it. Then Saint Anselm of Canterbury. Of course, he is a medieval philosopher, founder of scholasticism, we could say, first scholarly philosopher of Christian theology and rational system of faith origin. And his most significant contribution is the ontological argument for God's existence. I will dwell only upon this point. What is this ontological argument for God's existence? No? That is to say, there is an irrefutable logical intellectual argument for proving God's existence. What is that? We say if God exists, he must be a supreme being. About him, we can speak everything. Upon whom we can bestow everything. If God exists, he must be a supreme being. If he exists, if such an entity like creator, originator, unmoved mover, first cause, all benevolent, omnipotent, omniscient, if such a reality exists, he must be supreme and higher than everything we must. And if we can think of such a reality, that reality cannot exist in thought alone, but in reality itself it should exist. If it is existing in thought only, this is not a supreme being, because existence is not then attributed to that reality. See, I can say so many things about this book. This book is white in color. This has about 200 pages. Mar Joseph Pamplany is the author of this book. This has the cover page of Socrates. So many things I have said about this book. All these things I can say about this book only because it is existing. If only unless you attribute existence to this book, you cannot say these things about this book. You can say about these things, but all these things are nonsensical. They are only figments of mind. But if God exists, if there is God, existence must certainly pertain to that reality. Similarly, this is the ontological argument that existence become logically obligatory and binding and necessary for God. That is why it is called an ontological argument for God. So many things you can say about God, but all those things become void unless existence is attributed to God. Therefore, God becomes a necessary logical being. God becomes logically necessary a being. Necessarily, God should be existing. That is the argument of the ontological arguments for God's existence. This has been very original and ingenious at that time, but many people have argued against this also. Limitations also are there for this one. Because you can think about a golden mountain. Can you say that golden mountain exists? That is the criticism against ontological argument. Because you can think about a supreme good being, can you attribute existence about that? But the answer given by Anselm is that the existence of God is not like the existence of golden mountain or anything. This is an extremely unique existence. In that regard, ontological argument stands. That is how the debate goes. Okay, next author, most prominent author, Thomas Aquinas. And so many things have to be said about Aquinas, Italian philosopher and theologian, shaping Christian theology. And so many things I already said about Aquinas. He was really a saint as well. Okay, child died in his 40s before 50s, I think, and passed Dominican order member he was, and the son was training under several people. And the details you can collect from the book. And his approach to knowledge, again, he also emphasized the power of reason. I already said he considered reason as a prelude to faith, hope, and charity. Faith and reason are complementary. There is harmony between faith and human reason. Major works are Summa contra Gentiles and Summa Theologica. Revelation, understanding revelation through nature and scripture. God's revelation in nature should be understood rationally, speculatively. And he used Aristotelian metaphysics to develop the Christian and defend the Christian theology and doctrine. And Aquinas' 5 ways for proving God's existence are very famous. 5 ways to prove. See, these are not 5 proofs for God's existence, but 5 ways of conceiving God's existence. What is that? First mover. God is the first mover, the unmoved mover. Everything that is moving requires an external mover. The universe is a moving reality. There must be an unmoved external mover to the universe. That mover must be God. Second one, argument from universal causation. Everything that exists has a cause, and therefore, universe has existence. It is not the cause of itself. Therefore, there must be an uncaused first cause for the universe. Uncaused first cause for the universe. Again, argument from contingency. Universe is not necessary. That is to say, it is not the origin of itself. This book is not the origin of itself. Therefore, this is a contingent reality, we say. Okay, this cell phone is not the origin of itself. This is a contingent reality. If only it is the origin of itself, we can call it a necessary being. World is not necessary but contingent, we understand. Therefore, it must be dependent on something else for its origin. That upon which the world is dependent, we call a necessary being, and that necessary being is God. Therefore, the argument from contingency. Then the degree of goodness. We find different degrees of goodness or perfection in the world. Lower relate to high, medium relate to supreme, higher domains of beauty, for example, knowledge, for example, wisdom and intelligence, for example. Therefore, there must be a supreme goodness in the world too, which is the source of all grades of imperfection and perfection. Grades of perfection are possible because there is supreme perfection. And that absolute goodness of perfection we call God, the fourth way. The fifth way is the final cause of the teleological argument. The order and purpose in the natural world suggests design. It looks everything is so finely tuned, well integrated. And fine-tuning, cosmic fine-tuning in anthropology, contemporary cosmology is a prominent idea. Everything in well integrated. See, our eyes here in the front, not behind. Two eyes. Why this upright posture? Why those 5 fingers? We said our body follows the Fibonacci series, the golden ratio. Perfect mathematics, the intelligent design. Everything is intelligently designed, and design presupposes a designer. World is not the designer of itself. There must be an external designer, an uncaused designer, and that designer must be God. This is the fifth way of God's existence as conceived by Thomas Aquinas. And Christ has both the divine and the human nature. Aristotelian dualistic metaphysics, we discussed that. Aquinas' ethical framework, cardinal virtues, prudence, temperance, justice, fortitude, natural virtues derived from reason and moral philosophy. Theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. They are supernatural virtues which are divine grace. We received from as a divine grace. Moral principles and virtue ethics, ordering the will towards right things, cultivating virtue, principle of double effect or lesser evil. For example, in case of abortion, where both the life of the mother and child are under threat, the principle of double effect, advocated by Thomas Aquinas. Human existence, our ultimate goal is the beatific vision of God, ultimate union and fellowship with God. Significance of morality and virtue in achieving this goal. And it goes without saying that there was a tremendous impact of Saint Thomas Aquinas on Christian theology for long and for long. Okay. Unless you have we have only 5 minutes, I think I will take the final slide and will give a short summary of the Franciscan philosophers and the contemporary thinkers. William of Ockham, did I share this one? No, I think, okay. Okay, William of Ockham, another Bonaventure, William of Ockham, and Duns Scotus. 3 more Franciscan philosophers in your 8th chapter, I think. So what is important about Occam? So what we should know about all these three philosophers, and later on, the later contemporary thinkers, is that basically they are deviating significantly from the Thomistic and Aristotelian philosophy. They are challenging some of the ideas of Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. Say, William of Ockham, he is questioning the idea of distinguishing between form and matter, the world of ideas and the real world. Essence and existence we cannot reduce. We cannot distinguish them. We should consider them as one. For that, he is using a method called Occam's razor. Razor is used for shaving off unnecessary things, is it not? So we should always prefer simplicity, avoiding complexity. Therefore, you should not invoke too many metaphysical ideas of God. You should not try to prove God or divine nature merely by speculative, rational, metaphysical thinking alone. That is what the idea of Occam's razor is involved. Plurality is not to be assumed without necessity. You should always look for simplicity. That is the idea of Occam's razor. Okay. Actually, then Bonaventure's contribution is his theism and arguments for God contributed significantly to the formation of classical theism, argument from causality, and cosmological argument for God's existence, epistemic and cosmological argument, so very much similar to Thomas Aquinas, and creatio ex nihilo, creation of the universe out of nothing. Bonaventure very much developed this idea. And idea of cooperative epistemology, that is to say, rational soul's apprehension of the physical realm of being. Our soul can collectively understand the physical world illumined by divine light. And we must avoid extremism in moral life. Ecstatic union with God is the ultimate. And finally, Duns Scotus. He also argued for the non-distinction between essence and existence, scope of a formless matter in the beginning. Matter may have been void and formless in the beginning. Not all beings are made up of form and matter, as Aristotle and Aquinas held. Say, for example, soul, although it may be form, it does not have matter. It is then principle of individuation as opposed to uniformity among humans. We humans are very much distinct, unlike the common form that we are sharing. Analogous versus univocal. Partly same and partly different, we can say about God using human language. Thomas Aquinas said that. Whereas Duns Scotus says that this analogy is not helpful for speaking about God. He said univocal. So, for example, we say God is good. God's goodness is not say like I being good or Gandhiji being good. So we need a univocal understand. This analogical idea is not helpful for understanding God. Here he differs from Thomas Aquinas' idea. We can understand God only by experience, a posteriori. Only by experience we can understand God. And the most significant contribution of Duns Scotus is towards the theology of the Immaculate Conception of our Blessed Mother. Mary was redeemed by Christ, but that redemption of Mary or purification was in anticipation bestowed upon Mary. That is basically Duns Scotus' idea. And the final chapter, Modern Trends in Philosophy, Dialecticism, is the dialecticism of Hegel and Marx, that reality is always in conflict. Conflict between thesis and antithesis is resulting in synthesis. That is how history evolves. Conflicts, wars is at the root of historical evolution. Dialectical materialism you are familiar with. And realism in ontology, ontological realism is considering reality to be objectively independent of us. Without me, without my mind, reality exists. That is the idea of realism. This is what we see in Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, and so on. Ontological realism. World of real world is out metaphysical, realism. Nominalism is the opposite of that. All ideas are in mind. Our idea of God, idea of whiteness, idea of goodness, idea of beauty, idea of benevolence, all these things are there in our mind, nothing freed from our mind. That is the idea of nominalism. Scientific realism, and that is more on the line of philosophy of science, which says scientific theories are only tools for comprehending reality. That instrument, that is instrumentalism. That is one school. Another school of philosophy of science would say that in science also, what the theories and facts are independent of our mind. That is scientific realism. Then the humanist trend, its main attributes I have given there in that slide, in bracket. It emphasizes human freedom. I think I actually. Human power of reason, it emphasizes. Morality is subjective and contextual, not deontological or absolute as has been traditionally emphasized by religions and so on. Okay, then it is not ideal but imperfect humans. Mind as the product of brain. We are social animals, therefore emphasis on societal dimension. Since it emphasizes human freedom, recognition of the democratic societies, we should be goal-oriented and emphasis on human creativity, will to power, nature and companions. These are some of the major attributes of humanism, tending to be the power of human and his capacity, as opposed to reliance on God and religion. Materialism. Matter alone is the ultimate reality. Mind is simply a byproduct of the complexity of the interaction between material particles. This we will be criticizing all these doctrines in science religion dialogue later on in your advanced courses. Hedonism, the pleasure-seeking principle. Epicureanism, eat, drinking, and making merry. These are also some of the philosophy of life, schools of the philosophy of life of the contemporary times. All these are today outdated and old-fashioned philosophies, but still for curiosity's sake and historical completion, we are dwelling upon these concepts. So in gist, I have given the main ideas of the schools of philosophy, of the various schools in the history of philosophy, as is summarized in your book. So thanks for your attention.